The silence in that arena was the kind that only happens once in a lifetime. Thousands of people sat frozen, programs still in their hands, drinks untouched on their armrests. Simon Cowell, the man who had broken more dreams than any judge in television history, had stopped moving. His pen was down. His eyes were locked on the stage. And what was coming out of that microphone was something none of them had ever expected to hear from a quiet, soft-spoken man from the Philippines named Marcelito Pomoy. Nobody saw it coming. That was the thing. When Marcelito walked out onto that America's Got Talent champion stage, he looked like someone who had wandered in from the wrong audition. He smiled nervously. He adjusted the microphone. He looked out at the crowd with eyes that held something between hope and terror. The audience was polite. The judges were patient. Simon Cowell leaned back in his chair with that familiar expression, the one that says, "Impress me if you can." And then Marcelito opened his mouth. What came out first was a tenor voice so clean, so warm, so perfectly controlled that several people in the front row visibly jolted. It filled the enormous theater like sunlight through a cathedral window, bright, golden, and completely unexpected. The audience began to lean forward. Simon's eyebrow moved. Just slightly. But it moved. Then something happened that nobody in that building was prepared for. Without a single break, without a breath that anyone could see, without any warning at all, the voice changed. It dropped the tenor and rose into a soprano. Not a falsetto. Not a trick. A full, rich, heart-stopping soprano that soared up into the rafters of the theater and seemed to hang there like it had nowhere else to go. People gasped. Not politely. Loudly. The gasp of people who cannot believe what their ears are telling them. Marcelito Pomoy was singing both parts of a duet. Alone. On one microphone. Switching between a powerful male tenor and a stunning female soprano so seamlessly that your brain refused to process it as one human being. It sounded like two completely different singers, a man and a woman, performing together. But there was only Marcelito. Standing alone on that massive stage, in front of one of the toughest judging panels in the world, doing the impossible. Simon Cowell sat up straight. That almost never happens. The audience exploded halfway through the performance. Not polite applause, a roar. The kind of roar that comes from thousands of people realizing they are witnessing something they will remember for the rest of their lives. People were on their feet before he even finished. Some had their hands over their mouths. Some were crying. One woman near the aisle simply shook her head slowly, unable to find any other response to what she was hearing. Marcelito kept going. Eyes closed, heart open, every note placed with the precision of a man who had trained for this moment not for months but for his entire life. He had grown up in the Philippines dreaming of stages like this. He had competed on his home country's version of the show years before. He had won. But this, America, the champion's stage, Simon Cowell, this was different. This was the world watching. And the world could not look away. When the last note finally ended, the theater came apart. The standing ovation was instantaneous and total. Every single person in that building was on their feet. Simon Cowell, who had seen everything, who had heard every trick and every gimmick the music world had ever produced, stood up. He stood up and he clapped. And the expression on his face was not the polite, managed smile he gives when something is merely good. It was something rawer than that. Something closer to disbelief. When the noise finally died down enough for words, Simon leaned into his microphone. He looked at Marcelito the way a man looks at something he cannot fully explain. And he said that in all his years of doing this, he had never heard anything like it. That it was one of the most remarkable things he had ever witnessed on any stage anywhere in the world. Marcelito stood there, this quiet man from the Philippines, and he smiled. Not a triumphant smile. A grateful one. Like he was just happy to have been heard. But the story does not end with applause. Because what happened next backstage is what nobody talks about. What Marcelito said in that corridor, with the noise of the crowd still shaking the walls behind him, with tears on his face and a phone in his hand showing a message from home, that is the part that breaks you completely. His family had watched from thousands of miles away. His daughter, too young to understand what championships mean but old enough to hear her father's voice coming through a screen, had pointed at the television and said one word. Papa. That one word, in a tiny voice from the other side of the world, said everything that needed to be said about why Marcelito Pomoy stood on that stage. Not for Simon. Not for America. Not for champions titles or trophies or viral moments. He sang for her. And when you understand that, the performance changes. You hear it differently. Every note becomes not just a display of impossible talent but an act of love sent across an ocean. A father telling his daughter that she comes from someone extraordinary. That she comes from someone who refused to be ordinary. That no matter how far he travels or how big the stage, he carries her with him in every breath. The crowd gave Marcelito a standing ovation. Simon Cowell gave him his respect. But that little girl on the other side of a screen gave him the only thing that ever really mattered. And that is why this moment, this quiet man, this impossible voice, will never be forgotten.